Welcome to Misunderstandings and Contradictions, the art and life of Jacqueline de Jong in our series Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. Before I introduce today's esteemed speaker, I acknowledge Jacqueline de Jong's recent passing. She is sorely missed by those who knew her and her art. We're lucky to have Ariella Wolens here with us, who knew the artist well and will hopefully share some personal insights. Ariella Wolens is the Brian Taylor Curator of NSU Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale, where she has organized over a dozen exhibitions, including Valasse Ting, Parrot Jungle, Confrontation, Pierre Alechinsky and Keith Haring, and Scott Covert, I Had a Wonderful Life. In November, she will present Jacqueline de Jong, Vicious Circles, the first exhibition dedicated to Jacqueline de Jong to take place at an American institution. Wolens received a master's from Columbia University and her undergraduate degree from University College London. She has written for publications such as Art in America, Elephant, Flash Art, and Spike magazine. After the presentation, there will be time for Q&A, so please post your questions. Welcome, Ariella.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you for your incredible work and for this invitation to share Jacqueline de Jong's legacy with your audience. I also have to say thank you to Juliette Desorge for connecting us, as well as Jacqueline's family, who have been really just carrying her legacy from the minute that things just unexpectedly turned, and to Alette Fleischer, as well as the people who brought out Jacqueline to the US, really Alison Gingeris, the curator, and Kevin Repp, curator at the Beinecke Library. Jacqueline has amazing galleries, which have also really, it's been such a collaboration working together in the last 3 months since she passed. Everybody is sort of figuring things out together, and I want to thank also the NSU Art Museum and our director, Bonnie Clearwater, for supporting this initiative and taking the sort of opportunity for us to be the first museum to show Jacqueline's work with a monographic survey. And so the title of this talk is Misunderstandings and Contradictions, and I think that anybody who knew Jacqueline will know that that was often sort of central to communication. It was the source of creativity as well as conflict, and she very much embraced it. It was, excuse me, from one of the, up until now, cultural contributions, which she was best known for, the Situationist Times. And in the first iteration of the magazine, she wrote within this sort of stream of consciousness artwork and essay, Misunderstandings and Contradictions are not only of an extreme social value, but in fact the basis of all art and creation, if not the source of activity in general life. And this first image, I think, speaks well to that in the ways in which it's a conflation of two narratives. With Jacqueline's work, she's definitely an artist who's focused on narrative, but the interpretation and the way that plays out and the material aspects really are singular. And this is part of her série noire, which was inspired by book covers of French pulp fiction novels, but she's taking to non-fictional situations in this depiction, the first being the strangulation of Louis Althusser's wife, Helene Richman. And a few months later, there was also the unfortunate murder of Kandinsky's widow, and she fell victim to jewel robbers. And so I think this work sort of represents the way that the mind in misremembering can be a source of creativity. And this is just one of the ways in which I think Jacqueline approached sort of a non-structural line of thinking. She was as much of an activist and a publisher and just a cultural figure as she was a visual artist. And so I wanted to give some context as to how this, why this talk is taking place and how I came to know Jacqueline. So as Rachel mentioned, I will be NSU Art Museum, where I am the Brian Taylor curator, is opening the first monographic survey of Jacqueline de Jong in November. We have been working on this for about 3 years, and she said that she didn't think she was going to see it, realized, and I didn't believe her because she was so energetic and vibrant and really working up until her last moments and traveling up until 2 weeks before she passed. And so it was a labor of love that I was very fortunate to spend a great deal of time working with her. And the context for how this exhibition is taking place within Fort Lauderdale came about, we'll get back to that, through the museum's very eclectic collection, which includes the largest collection of artworks related to the Cobra movement outside of Europe. This was the result of a donation by a couple from Miami Beach, Meyer and Golden Marks. They traveled to Copenhagen in the early 60s and encountered the work of Cobra and just instantly fell in love. And this was long before Cobra was really recognized within the US. And so they amassed this collection of over 1,700 works, and they decided that they wanted, upon passing, to donate it to a South Florida institution. But the requirement was that there always be at least one artwork on view from the collection at all times. And none of the institutions in Miami would consent to this, but they approached Fort Lauderdale and they embraced it fully. And so since their donation, which started, I believe in, I think it was in 78. Since then, there has always been work on view by a Cobra affiliated artist. And in my coming to NSU, I wanted to look at new forms of considering Cobra and its legacy, which really, beyond NSU, there hasn't been a lot of representation about the movement, which Jacqueline was really the touchstone of the living legacy for. She, up until she passed, she was not an original member of the group, but her work and her collaboration with Asger Jorn is directly tied to what the movement was about and what came after it. And it was very much sort of a détournement in the way that the Situationist International and everything that followed Cobra, she was very much in line with. And so since 86, the gallery that represented most of the Cobra artists within the US, Lefebvre Gallery, once that closed, there really hasn't been a view of Cobra with sort of a lot of focus or intention within the US. But at the same time, in my coming to the subject, I wanted to look at the histories that are relevant to today, and that very much comes out of my work with Alison Gingeris, who curated the avant-garde Won't Give Up, Cobra and Its Legacy in 2015, in which Jacqueline's artwork was presented in Los Angeles. You see her work here on the left, Le Salo es Salopard. And this sort of ignited this traction that really over the last 9 years had seen Jacqueline have representation in the US. And this exhibition very much is resultant from that. And this exhibition at Bloom & Poe looked at the ways that the sort of fundamental motifs and concerns within Cobra were carried on and are seen within the work of contemporary artists, as well as the living artists such as Jacqueline, who are part of that legacy. And she was as much a part of the avant-garde as she was a part of the contemporary art scene. She is one of the few historical artists who really engaged with and had an impact on young artists and had her work presented alongside it. And so in my coming to NSU, I wanted to make sure that I was focused on something that people saw as relevant, or sort of unpacking Cobra to see these people as individuals. It's not a contained movement. It was only 3 years long. There are people who partook in single exhibitions or wrote for Cobra magazine or came into contact with the artists later in life, such as Wallace Ting, who were not part of the movement. And it is sort of an umbrella term, but what I would like to do with my work at the museum is look at the people who sort of fall outside of those, the hegemonic idea of it as just being these white Northern European male artists. So Wallace Ting, a Chinese American sort of globalist figure before the term was invented. Pierre Alashinsky, who is the last living original, well, he was one of the original members, not a founding member of Cobra, who was the central influence of one of the most recognizable artists in the world, Keith Haring. And just sort of with Jacqueline, she was one of the last living touchstones for the sort of what this movement meant, and also just within her own right, her legacy has not yet been really grappled with. And, you know, we were very lucky to sort of have this engagement with her because she really is part of our museum as this representative of Cobra. And so in telling this story of Jacqueline, I'm going to be focusing on her biography a lot more than I would if this was a more generalist sort of lecture about her work within the context of Fritz Asher. I am going to highlight her early years, her childhood, and she was not somebody who ever wanted her biography or her experience during the Holocaust to be the context for her work. She did not want to be considered a Jewish artist or a woman artist or anything that would sort of categorize her. But then at the same time, with the nature of her sort of contradiction, she absolutely recognized that this was part of her history, and that her history, regardless of how much she was sort of an empath in a way that went beyond the personal. The personal was always, I think, something that shaped her empathy. So this is a portrait of Jacqueline's family. She was born in Enschede near Hengelo, and she was the daughter of Hans and Alice de Jong. And so she was born in 1939, just right before the start of the Second World War. And growing up in the Netherlands, she historically is in a place of, religious acceptance. And I think she remained in the Netherlands in part after the war because of this sort of the liberalism of the Dutch way of life. And historically, Simon Schama had a term for this sort of tolerance that characterized the Dutch culture, which he called the locus classicus of benign pluralism. And he describes within his book, The Embarrassment of Riches, how the Sephardic Jews settled within the Netherlands, and then later the Ashkenazi Jews in the 17th century. And so from this time, there had been a prominent population of the wandering Jew. And this is still a history that's being grappled with. The Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam only opened this year. And it is the first dedicated solely to the subject of the Dutch experience of the Holocaust. Jacqueline was a prominent supporter of the museum, and I am glad she got to see it opened. And so Jacqueline's parents, she says that they were interested in everything modern, and they met the artist Max van Dam, and he painted many, many portraits of Jacqueline's mother and eventually became her lover. And this was in 1941. Jacqueline's family already in 1940, she's 1 year old, once the Nazis enter the Netherlands. Her family has gone into hiding. They tried to escape by boat to England, but they didn't make it, which was fortunate because the boat was hit by a mine and sank. And then the next year in 1942, Jacqueline, her mother, and Max fled with false papers to Switzerland. And then on their way, they were apprehended by the French police at the Swiss-French border. And while they were awaiting transit to Drancy, they were put up in a hotel where there were women from the French resistance staying. And those women helped Jacqueline and her mother get to the Swiss border on foot. But Max van Dam reported to the police station as he was told, and he was deported, and he was murdered in Sobibor. So Jacqueline, even though she was so young, I think had a very direct experience of, and came extremely close to being at experience really the ultimate devastation of the Holocaust. Her father at the time was in hiding. He pretended to be divorced to explain why he was alone, and he hid in various places within Amsterdam, including, I believe, in the basement of his tailor. And then in 1945, after the war, the family reunited, and they moved back to Hengelo in 1947 when Jacqueline was 8 years old. Their house had been rebuilt following seizure and bombing. And you see Jacqueline here. She is the one individual with dark hair in this sea of blonde children. And she talks about sort of being very isolated and being sort of made fun of for, ultimately her Jewish cultural appearance. She said that, she hated her hair, and the people in school called her Papua. And so one of her first works is here on the left, and it's self-portrait as Papua. And then you have this one from 1958 in which you see her with straight blonde hair. So I think that perhaps this was an idealization of maybe what she thought she was meant to look like as a young girl. There's a fantastic film documentary about Jacqueline called The Art Rebel, which will be presenting within our exhibition, and it is produced by her cousin, James Valais, who's an incredible supporter of Jacqueline's work, and can provide even greater insight than anyone in being able to hear directly from Jacqueline about her life. And so Jacqueline didn't initially want to be an artist. She wanted to be an actress, which I think was fitting. She was always, very histrionic, and she didn't make it. She wasn't allowed into the academy in Arnhem, and so she pivoted, and she went to Paris and worked at the Dior store in 1957. And 10 days after she started, Christian Dior died. So she seemed to have these sort of stops and starts along the way, which I think, again, is just another sort of example of the détournement and the way that her life was very much her responding to the immediate and always engaging in the now, which really is the sort of the thematic context, or sort of the narrative thread of the exhibition at NSU, looking at the ways in which she was always engaged with the present, even when concerned with the past. It was a way of showing how history is this sort of vicious circle of repetition, and the way that society and human conflict is always sort of realized in the same ways. And so in 1958, having not realized her ambition of becoming an actress, sort of beginning to experience life in Paris, she decides to come back to Amsterdam, and her father, being an art collector, has incredible contacts, including to Willem Sandberg, who at the time was the director of the Stedelijk Museum, and he really was a central figure in teaching Jacqueline graphic design, typography, introducing her to the Situationists, and I think was an incredible mentor. He also brought Cobra to Stedelijk, and was her introduction to many more people who became central to her work and her life. And so he, Sandberg, was a master typographer, as I mentioned, and also really encouraged Jacqueline's art making, and told her that she should go study with Stanley William Hayter in Paris at Atelier 17. And so after working at the Stedelijk for, I believe she was there in total for 4 years, she was also studying with HLC Jaffe, who was a curator at the Stedelijk, and who would contribute to the Situationist Times. And so she has this sort of apprenticeship and education, and then is encouraged to continue on her sort of art making trajectory, as really making that. She always called herself like an amateur professional, I think because she didn't have sort of the academic art education, but she really did have an incredible, she worked with incredible mentors, and Hader was one of them, and printmaking has been central, or had always been central to her practice. This is the first work she makes in 1962, an engraving series called La Folie Endormie. And it really continues and evolves into her work as a graphic designer and a printmaker, a typographer. You see here a number of her printed matter works that were installed in the retrospective Pinball Wizard, the work and life of Jacqueline de Jong, curated by Margriet Schavenmacher at the Stedelijk Museum in 2019. And she really embraced the practice throughout her life, and it was also central to her work in propaganda and her political activism. So in addition to her legacy as the co-founder, publisher, and designer of the Situationist Times, Jacqueline is often invoked in relation to her partnership with Asger Jorn. Asger Jorn was the Danish figurehead of Cobra. He was also part of many other movements before and after, including the Situationist International. And they met in 1958 in London. Jacqueline's father collected Jorn's work, and it was a chance meeting, or somewhat arranged, Jacqueline thinks perhaps, and it evolved into a 10-year relationship, and in which they lived in Paris, and they really had as much of a professional collaboration as they did a romantic partnership. There is a fantastic portfolio publication called The Case of the Ascetic Satyr, in which their love letters to each other have been reproduced, as well as a series of original lithographs by both of the artists. And so another of the contradictions, I think, in talking about Jacqueline's work is that she really, hated being spoken of in terms of Cobra or in relation to her partnership with Jorn, but at the same time, she honored it, and she, she felt that this project was very important, and that there were other projects which were in the making before she passed with Jorn's archive, and she really was part of in having his work go to, really placing his work in institutions and being sort of a historical touchstone for people. She had always championed him, and I think he seems to have been a very beloved figure that was incredibly charismatic. And I think people tend to see Jacqueline's beginnings as an artist very much in terms of Cobra and Jorn's influence. And again, this is something that I think she both embraced and refuted. This is an installation of her work alongside Jorn's. This is one of the paintings that is in the Stedelijk collection, Le Voyage de Munich. And then to the right of that, you see a painting by Jacqueline, which is dedicated to Jorn. And so while she is open to having the work displayed alongside hers, I think it was very much something that needed to be sort of considered within, beyond not just the biography, but that her influences went far beyond Jorn and Cobra. And she says that, and you see here, this sort of figurative abstraction that was central to Cobra and this colorism. And she said that really what she got from Jorn was this understanding and sort of eye for color. But she quickly evolves into her own style, which becomes much more figurative. Her palette is very much her own. The violence was something that Cobra very much shied away from, sort of in their sort of trauma and reaction to their experiences of the Second World War. They were really focused on innocence and play and sort of countering what they had experienced, but she really sort of goes full throttle in her depictions. But then you see this piece here is in the collection of the Cobra Museum. So there's things that are sort of inevitably linked, but at the same time, she says that it wasn't Cobra or Jorn that really birthed her politics or her desire to work in printed matter or have a sort of Marxist political conviction. Beyond Jorn, it was really her stumbling across the bulletin of the Surrealism Revolutionnaire, which was the sort of faction of the Belgian artists within Cobra, pre-Cobra. And she saw this and she says this is where everything began for her. It was a publication that was created by the secretary of Cobra, Christian d'Autremont, alongside Noël Arnaud, who was the publisher who would co-produce the Situationist Times with Jacqueline and was also a central figure within her life and her collaboration. And within this, this is when her sort of political consciousness is really raised, and she is introduced to Guy Debord through Willem Sandberg. They were going to do an exhibition at the Stedelijk, but Debord insisted on having all of the walls taken out of the museum, so it never happened. But they stayed in touch, and then Jacqueline was one of, I believe, 2 women, in addition to Michelle Bernstein, to join and be a member of the Situationist International. And her time with the group ended up being short-lived because she came out in support of the German Situationists, which were the artists that were part of the Gruppe Spur. Debord felt that they were sort of against the Marxist moral order of the Situationists in selling their art, which was contradictory in itself because the Situationist International had been founded by the sale of Asger Jorn's paintings. And so Jacqueline refused to have this not be a matter of discourse and have Debord just take this ultimate stance. And he ended up throwing her out as well. And that is what birthed the Situationist Times. But in addition to the Situationist Times, another aspect of Jacqueline's history that has yet to really be considered is her involvement with the Pataphysics movement. And so she was sort of I believe she was the Dutch secretary of the School of Pataphysics. There's a publication that came out in 2022 about her involvement with the movement, which is very much connected with her work with the Situationists. But hopefully there's a lot more that I think needs to be considered within Jacqueline's history and her involvement with the movement. And so this, I love, this is from Jacqueline's archive, which is within the Beinecke Library at Yale, thanks to Kevin Rapp. And it's a letter to Guy Debord in which she is asking, what is the status of things and where are we going from here? And if you don't if you're going to expel the Spur, then she's leaving too. And just the hardness with which she's writing and the fierceness of her hand, it's just like it's sculptural within the piece, and you really just see her intensity and her passion coming through. And she, I think, going through her archive, it's many people recognize that her conviction as being something that really defined her. And so we don't have time to go into the enormity of significance of the Situationist Times, but it is what she has been known for up until now, as being just an incredibly influential moment for artist publishing, within experimental graphic design. It was very much something that in her correspondence, everything that I came across that was, I mean, there's pages and pages and pages related to the production of it. She really not only was the artistic force, but she was the one who really sort of championed it, and is the reason that it came to fruition. It was a collaborative work, but also it really was something that was Jacqueline's. I think it was it's central to her art. And people tend to consider the work as being sort of responsive to Potluck and Guy Debord's magazine, or to Kerber magazine, but she says that it was very much sort of inspired by I-10, the Dutch magazine, which was worked on by, I think there were contributions by Moholy Nagy as well as Kurt Schwitters, and you can see just the incredible sort of pioneering work in design within this. And I encourage everyone who's interested and able to go to Yale to really to have the opportunity to see in person the contents of her archive, which includes these incredible maquettes for the Situationist Times magazine. It really is sort of a pilgrimage that anybody who is interested in Jacqueline's work should definitely make. And so within the Situationist Times, each issue was devoted to a different topology, but the final issue, which wasn't meant to be the final issue, was a collaborative endeavor in which she invited artists to create lithographs. So it became sort of this portfolio artwork, but also this cross-section of these sort of social artist circles. And it was in part inspired by Wallace Ting's best known work, which is One Cent Life, in which he invited, I forget how many artists, but just an incredible cross-section of pop and European avant-garde artists to contribute to this beautiful print portfolio. And my last Kerber-related exhibition was of Wallace, and it ties in nicely with Jacqueline in that her final issue of the Situationist Times, or the last issue which was not realized, was meant to be about the topology of pinball. And Wallace is the one who introduced her to pinball. And this was realized in part as part of the 2019 retrospective at the Stedelijk, but is also something that's very much a symbol for her work, and play is as central to her considerations of human engagement, and a representation of civilization in terms of conflict and eroticism. I think for her, even these unrelated subjects are very much part of the same sort of human, the fundamental, like human emotion and way of being. And so we're only in 68 because there's way too much of Jacqueline to, go through all of her artwork as well as her personal life and, this incredible contribution she made to the 60s avant-garde. But I'll just touch on this part of her oeuvre in which she sort of is engaging with pop in her palette, but also really leaning into the sort of the eroticism and the surrealism that is within her sort of her vocabulary. And it really goes to the extreme, and it strikes the interest of Phyllis and Eberhard Kronhauser, who are two incredible pioneering sexologists in the 60s. They have a traveling erotic exhibition, which comes after the Swedish government banning any form of pornographic censorship. And so this exhibition included Jacqueline, and they collected her work, some of which you'll see. There's one on the far right, and I think it's the dinosaur amoureux. And then that's the Cosmonaut series, which we saw with the signature image for Vicious Circles. And again, she's sort of engaging with the contemporary and the subject of war, but she said that her interest wasn't in necessarily the historical aspects, but thinking about the experience of a cosmonaut in space, looking down on the Earth, and that sort of what that interiority would have looked like and how it would be sort of represented in this zero gravity space. So you see her with this, there's a tondo piece here that's actually missing, but it can be shown in multiple different directions. So it's a sort of material representation of the zero gravity experience of the cosmonaut. And so I think I'll pause there unless we have more time, but I think that this is will be more of a part one to Jacqueline's life.
Thank you so much, Ariella. This is a lot to digest.
It is, and I'll just finish with an image of Jacqueline. That's her in her studio with her Borderline series, which was one of her last series. In addition to that, when I visited her studio earlier this month, I'll just show you, this is the last body of work that she did. This is a depiction of food being airdropped into Rafah in Gaza, and just shows her most recent, the last sort of the subjects that she was focused on in her sort of the last years was really looking at news imagery. She did paintings that were responding to the war in Ukraine as well. So very much a direct engagement. And she painted up until the last moment.
That's absolutely amazing. So we could you also show these border images about the border situation again?
Sure. So the borderline, these were a response to the global migrant crisis. It's a series that started in 2021. I'm very happy to say that NSU purchased one of the works, which became the first work by Jacqueline first painting to be acquired by a US institution. There are many more that are in the works, but she created this series in which she uses Nepheline gel as well. And she like depicts barbed wire, and it's very tactile and has this sort of incredible grit and sculptural aspect to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think actually everybody, please put your questions in the Q&A or chat sections. And I would like to go like take a huge step back and ask you, what is COBRA?
So COBRA is an acronym for Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam. It was a movement that was founded in 1948. The original founders included Asger Jorn, as well as Carl Appel, Christian d'Outremont, Joseph Noiret, and it was really sort of a counter movement to they were really responding to Breton and the idea of his notions of surrealism as being something that had to be entirely cerebral. They wanted it to be about spontaneity, about play, about collaboration. And so it was a sort of a collective endeavor that lasted 3 years. In being about spontaneity, it was sort of hard to continue. And it ended when Jorn and d'Outremont, I think they both contracted typhoid, but the artists continued to collaborate throughout their lives, and the styles and the ways in which they worked were central to a number of artists who don't necessarily, that connected for these few moments. And there was a legacy beyond that, of which Jacqueline was a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. So we have a little Jewish geography. Rachel is asking whether Ariella de Jong is a relative, because she's
Ariella de Jong,
yeah,
the writer. I know, but I know that she is a relative of the artist Jordan Wolfson.
Okay.
But you have had David de Jong as a contributor, who is the nephew of Jacqueline. And I think it's a very, it's a Dutch name that appears a lot. I think it means the young.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, so where's the old? Anyway, so Rachel said it's, Ariella is also boundary breaking and wrote Fear of Flying 50 years ago. So this boundary breaking is definitely something that we can identify for Jacqueline de Jong and her work. And I'm just very impressed by the rich well of inspirations that she uses and turns into these very, very complex images. And yeah, that's absolutely amazing.
It is. And in the Art Rebel, the documentary, it is amazing that they have an interview with Michelle Bernstein, and she says within it that Jacqueline is not like any other artist that she encountered, and that she never stopped sort of evolving. Even when she hit upon something that was successful, she pivoted, and she really never stopped sort of thinking and taking new material and sort of reinterpreting it through, even though she's dealing with things that are very much sort of historical and narrative based, she was always responding in a very material way, and that's where she started. And I think that just makes it incredibly unique for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I noticed when you spoke about her evolution, that she belonged to a lot of artist groups. whether in the printing, whether you know, the start in with Cobra, with Spur, the Germans,
but always fiercely independent at the same time.
yeah.
The contradiction is very real in that sense.
Yeah. So did that continue throughout her life, or was there a moment when she said, you know, this is over for me from now on, it's just me? Or was that an expression of the time that they artists just organized in artist groups? Yeah.
I think definitely like it's very much part of her experience of the avant-garde but in 69 she started a relationship with Hans Brinkmann, and together they had a gallery and they moved back to Amsterdam. So that was sort of another like side endeavor that she had, and a collaboration. And then I think once she was in Amsterdam, there wasn't the same sort of fervor as there was in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And her studio practice is really becomes sort of her central focus, in a way that she's not working on the Situationist Times, or you know, pulled in different directions through her activism. And in that way, I think she became more independent, but she was always sort of on the scene in Amsterdam. I think she really, like, she knew everyone. If you would go to her house, it would just be like a stream of people just coming in and out, like knocking on the door, and they would be 20 years old, or they would be, you know, her friends that she's known all her life. And she was excited about what was happening. She saw exhibitions. She went to every art fair and every exhibition, and she was really engaged with the sort of the support network of artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what kind of art did she sell in her gallery?
I don't know. She had some exhibitions of her own work, but it was sort of more like Hans's endeavor. But it was, I think, primarily Dutch art. It wasn't like something that in the end, it sort of ended up causing a lot of friction between them, I think. But it was definitely part of her sort of empathic work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And I can also understand why she did not want to be put in a box, not the Kuba box, not the Jewish artist box, not the, you know, Holocaust survivor box, certainly not. And woman's artist box also not.
But she also acknowledged all those things. And so it's like, it's a very like nuanced position.
Yeah, and I understand that, because it can be very limiting to be pressed into a minority. It could be, you know, could mean, or it used to mean, that you didn't make it out in the
Right.
big world,
Exactly.
big wide world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I very much understand that. But towards the end of her life, first of all, did she know she was approaching the end of her life, or was that a surprise?
I have to speculate, which I don't want to, with like utmost respect, she was so headstrong that, and I think she never wanted to be sick. She never, I mean, in the way nobody does, but she could never stop working. She didn't want to be incapacitated. I think that reality was just something that she would not confront. And she maybe knew she was sick for longer than there was, I think, some time went by before she confronted it.
Mhm.
It was she told me that she was sick on May 29th and she died on June 29th.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it was really far along by the time that she had the real diagnosis. And I think she she didn't want to try and she didn't want to be sick for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Very
But at the same
understandable.
time, it just like, it felt very, and she was 85 years old, but it seems so abrupt. She just, there was no sense of her stopping. And yeah, she was just like an individual that I can't, I've never met an artist like her.
Uh-huh.
And I'll show you at her funeral, people, she made a series called Pomme de Jong, in
Mm-hmm.
which she gilded potato sprouts and turned them into jewelry. And then she also used them to make potato prints. And at her grave, you'll see everybody got a potato and left it in tribute to her. So if anybody wants to knows anybody in the sort of the Ministry of Culture within Amsterdam, we want a potato monument to Jacqueline de Jong.
I love that. That's amazing. So, knowing that she would be dying, did she change her behavior? Like, did she open up? Did she talk about things that she didn't talk about before?
Not at all.
Not at
She wouldn't talk about, I mean, there was, right now, her estate is being managed by her brother and her friend who worked with her on her archive, Alette Fleischer, and they've done an incredible job of sort of culling together all the material of Jacqueline's life and work, because she really, like, she was so independent and she never wanted to talk about you know, an estate or what would happen after she passed. Even up until the end, it was like, I think now things are really sort of happening sort of after the fact, because she was so much in the present.
all.
She never wanted to talk about you know, what would happen after.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Susan is asking, was Jacqueline involved in Judaism in any way through the community or literature or through art?
She contributed to the establishment of the Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam, but in terms of practicing, she didn't practice. I asked her, she thought I grew up in an observant Jewish home, and she couldn't understand like keeping kosher. It was like unfathomable to her. I think her parents were not observant Jews, but it was very much, I think, part of her, it was still part of her cultural identity, and not something that she, you know, refuted. But then you see those paintings from her childhood of her as Papua, and I think there's like a real, and of course with the experience of the Holocaust, like questioning, and I think it really isolated her in her youth.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So Ariella, you're preparing the exhibition at your museum. So will that be retrospective? Like, will it be an overview, or will there be a focus on a specific time, or how will it be, and when does it
Right.
open?
So it opens November 16th. It will be, I'm calling it a monographic survey as opposed to a retrospective, because I would need the whole museum in order to do that, you know, justice to her her entire sort of oeuvre. But we're looking at her work through the context of her engagement with the present moment, and always responding and reacting to you know, any form of injustice or any movement that she really had a instinctual response to, that she chose to react to within her art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually that empathy one can feel looking at her work, that she really feels for the people.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes incredibly, you know, her work, there's always this like underlying level of like humor or like duality, but then at the end it just becomes incredibly earnest and direct and like unequivocal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And the
wonderful.
difficult images, like it's, you know, I wonder what the sort of commercial responses to the work beyond sort of an institutional acquisition. You know, this isn't something that people would hang in their living room, but then it's something that needs to be seen.
It is very, I mean, she's very intense, that's for sure.
Yes, yes.
And every artwork of hers, I would even go so far to say even this jewelry, the potato jewelry.
Yeah, I mean, it's so loaded.
Yes, has
It's the
such.
history of famine and war within a, you know, a gilded potato.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite amazing, quite a, and I think as more and more people will learn about her work, of course it will go into living rooms, and I have no doubt beyond institutions. And
Yes, I mean, her work is, you know, there is definitely representation within some incredible private collections. But as you know, with the work, when it becomes like this work is in the collection of Beth DeWoody, and there were works that she would create alongside, you know, dealing with these contemporary issues. Like there would always be works on paper that she would paint that were entirely removed from any sort of historical context, but to sort of deal with the intensity of the subjects. And there are, you know, really serious collectors who, you know, understand the importance you know, of these works, regardless of how it makes them feel, perhaps on a sort of initial visceral level. But she was just fearless
Mhm.
and uncompromising.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's what's so attractive, if in lack of a better word, about her work, the intensity, empathy, and the fearlessness. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ariella. Now we all
Thank
have
you.
to go online and book a flight to Florida to see the
Yes.
exhibition once it opens.
Yes. Or if any curators or directors want to take the show to their institutions, you know, the more people that can see Jacqueline's work, I think she would just be absolutely thrilled to have, you know, her work seen by a great audience.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Ariella.
Thank
I hope
you.
we do our part in, giving a big shout out. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.